In this unit, we're starting a new unit. In this unit, we're going to be talking about substance abuse testing or drug testing programs. Most companies have some type of drug testing programs. As safety managers, you will probably be involved in managing the drug testing program at your company. And drug testing, I'm talking about alcohol as well as drugs. As a safety manager, again, you may be the main person responsible for the program. You may have to do all the paperwork, take people into clinics for the tests. You might even have to, depending on what type of system your company has set up, you may even have to take urine samples. Or maybe hair samples. But urinalysis and urine samples, that's the most common type of drug test that we have today. Most companies drug test. Most of you have probably had a drug test at some point in your life. Even high schools do drug testing with athletes or students who are involved in secondary extracurricular activities, band, sports, FFA, who knows. But you see it in high schools, colleges, college athletes, and also in the workplace. Some of you may have already had a drug test so that you could get a job. That's part of the process for most companies nowadays, which is a good thing. A drug-free workplace is a safer workplace. Another thing that you might have to look forward to as a safety manager is dealing with drunk people and or high people on the job site. I'm going to skip the video here. It's a reenactment. It's funny, but it's to save a little time, we won't watch the video. But it's actors reenacting a situation where a drunk construction worker was driving a scissor lift down the street. And that was a reenactment in the video. But those types of situations have happened. In your career, you will have people under the influence in your workplaces, and you'll have to deal with it. One of the most difficult situations I had to deal with was one of our accountants. She would go to lunch every day. After lunch, she would come back under the influence. And she was the type of person that when she had too much to drink, she'd be very rude, obnoxious, belligerent. After about 6 weeks of this going on, her supervisor called me and asked me to come in and get her and take her in for a alcohol test. And she failed the alcohol test, and she ended up losing her job as a result. Probably, I would bet that most of you will have that type of experience at some point. Out in the field, I've also had to deal with workers who were under the influence of alcohol or drugs. That's where the random testing program comes into place. And random testing works best for drug abuse. Not so much for alcohol abuse, but drug abuse. You can catch that problem through your random testing programs. And as we go through this unit, we're going to talk about drug testing programs and different variations of drug testing programs. One issue that you're going to run into, or that's a current issue that's ongoing right now, it's caused a little bit of controversy in Oklahoma, has to do with medical marijuana in the workplace. Ever since Oklahoma passed the medical marijuana laws allowing residents of Oklahoma to have medical marijuana cards and to legally purchase marijuana for medical purpose, there's been this debate about what are employers going to do when one of their workers who has a medical marijuana card tests positive for marijuana. In response to this question, in response to this controversy, the state law has been clarified. If you have workers performing safety-sensitive functions, examples of safety-sensitive functions would be driving a motor vehicle, working at high elevations, construction worker, high up in the air. Again, safety-sensitive functions, driving, working, Work involving firearms. An example of that might be an armed security guard or a police officer. Just because a police officer's got a medical marijuana card, you don't want them carrying firearms if they're under the influence. But this law, or the clarification of the law, clearly states that employers may terminate employees testing positive for marijuana even if they have a medical marijuana card. Again, that's if it's a safety-sensitive function. Along the same lines, high-risk industries, the oil drilling industry, construction industry, agriculture, some manufacturing, law enforcement. High-risk industries can refuse to hire someone who tests positive even if they have a medical marijuana card. This also goes along with if you have medical marijuana, or if you have marijuana that's legal for recreational uses. That's something that we dealt with in Colorado. In Colorado, it was legal for medical uses, it was legal for recreational. You could go down to your local neighborhood dispensary and buy whatever you wanted to. You could buy brownies, you could buy marijuana to smoke, whatever you wanted to do. There's all kinds of candies, gummy bears, and all kinds of stuff available for anybody that's of legal age to go in and purchase. In that environment, at Kiewit, our position was if somebody tests positive for marijuana in a pre-employment test, we're not going to hire them, even if they have a medical marijuana card, because you can't have people who are high performing dangerous work. Just like you can't have people who are drunk performing dangerous work. Yeah, alcohol's legal, but we can't have people under the influence of alcohol driving a truck, operating a crane, working around dangerous machinery in a manufacturing environment. Again, that's common sense safety right there. When you're working in dangerous environments, you need to be aware and you need to have all your faculties. You can't have any kind of impairment in that situation. Now, there's still gray area when it comes to employees working in operations that aren't safety sensitive, like a secretary in an office, or a manager, sales manager in an office type environment. Now, maybe their work is not safety sensitive. Again, the gray area is there, and that's when you bring in an attorney. In Oklahoma, we're in an employment at will state. And that employment at will state means that employers can legally hire and terminate whoever they want to without cause. But still, there may be some legal ramifications of that if the person who was terminated argues that they were discriminated against in some way. An employee who's hired because they tested positive for marijuana and they had a medical marijuana card, but they're fired anyway, that employee could come back and try to make the argument that the employer discriminated against them because of their medical condition. You got to get lawyers involved in those situations. But if it's a safety-sensitive situation, it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear if it's safety-sensitive. The employer can terminate someone who's under the influence of anything if they're doing something dangerous. If you'd like to explore this issue in a little more detail, you can go to the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority webpage, and this thing is changing continually. This law was enacted before we were really ready for this law to be enacted, and they're constantly changing it and upgrading it to get it to the place it needs to be. All right, that may be an issue that you have to deal with as safety managers, medical marijuana in the workplace. And I think eventually, maybe within 5-10 years, maybe sooner, it will be recreational in Oklahoma too. But again, just because it's legal doesn't mean you can be drunk or high at work. Alcohol's legal, but you can't be drunk at work. A drug and alcohol-free workplace is a safer workplace. And how does substance abuse testing and keeping drugs and alcohol out of the workplace make it a safer workplace? Well, there's an indirect effect, an indirect mechanism going on where we're screening undesirables from the workforce. Drug and alcohol users oftentimes will have a higher risk tolerance, and that higher risk tolerance means they're going to be more likely to get injured. Also, there's a drug and alcohol lifestyle. Don't get enough sleep, don't eat right, they're always broke. That may contribute to workplace accidents also. Also, drug and alcohol abusers, we tend to see a higher turnover rate among those individuals. And high turnover is associated with workplace safety incidents. And by high turnover, we mean they'll go to work, they'll work for a couple of months, and then something causes them to quit or be fired. Again, that's not good for companies to have that kind of high turnover rate where they're just running through different employees constantly. It's hard to develop a safety culture. It's hard to develop a good, safe team environment if employees are coming in and out this revolving door continually. But with pre-work or pre-employment drug and alcohol screens, we can screen out some of these problems. Then there's also the direct effect. Having a substance abuse program can help prevent impairment-related accidents, especially if we're talking about those safety-sensitive operations. Now, I'll give you one example, and I may have mentioned this earlier in the semester, or maybe it was in another class. It may have been in the when we talked about fleet safety in my machine and materials classes. But I'll give you an example of, I saw the importance, the effect of a substance abuse program in a company. Whitworth Construction, the first company I worked with, in 1999, they didn't have any kind of drug testing program, not even for truck drivers. One of the first things I did was go in and implement a regulated drug testing program for DOT truck drivers. I mean, that was a law. That was a legal requirement. We had to do that to be compliant with laws. Start a drug testing program for our drivers. Now, this didn't have any immediate impact on injury rates. But a few years later, we implemented a pre-employment and random testing program for drugs and alcohol for all employees. Almost overnight, we saw an immediate impact. We went from having over 20 recordables per year to less than 10 recordables per year. Again, I attribute, there was more going on than just the drug testing program, but a lot of that improvement I attribute to the implementation of a drug testing substance abuse program for all employees. It allowed us to screen out some people that we really didn't want working for us. It allowed us to detect situations where employees were under the influence on the job. And every quarter, we did a quarterly drug test, quarterly random drug test, 4 times a year. Every quarter, we would find someone. There was someone that would test positive. And it was funny, a lot of the times, these people who would test positive, if you saw them on the street, you would never guess that they were using methamphetamine, or you never would guess that they would smoke marijuana or use some other illicit drug. We tend to have these stereotypes, but those stereotypes go out the window. At least that was my experience. I would say at least half of the people who tested positive were clean-cut, good, hard-working Americans, or at least that's what you thought. But they end up failing a drug screen. And one of them, after we terminated him, it was a few months later, but he was busted for running a meth lab. And again, before the drug test, he was really good at hiding his second life as a methamphetamine cook and running that methamphetamine lab. He was manufacturing it, distributing it, and using it. And that's where we caught him. He was under the influence for meth when we had to terminate him. Now, one of the really cool things about this, and related back to workers' compensation, once we got this implemented, this program, we received a premium credit from the insurance company that paid for the cost of the program. We ended up really not having any dollars out of pocket. We spent money on the program, but the premium credit ended up, we may have even made a little bit of money off the program. We probably come out in the black in the transaction before it was all done, but it ended up not costing us anything. It didn't add cost to our operations. Now, one thing that companies need to have if they have any kind of substance abuse testing program is a written substance abuse program. And that's what I want to talk about now. First of all, we'll go through some of the points related to a substance abuse program, having this written program, and then I'll go page by page through a sample program. But if you have a program, you need to keep it up to date with changing regulations. You need to have an attorney review your program, and all changes or updates that are made periodically need to be reviewed by an attorney. At Whitworth Construction, again, they didn't have a program. I wrote the program, but before it was implemented, I got a hold of one of the company's attorneys and had them read through it. They made a few suggestions. I made a few changes based on those suggestions, but then we were good to go with the program, getting it implemented. And that originally, we had the original program. Then a few years later, when we added everybody else, we made that change. We updated the program. Those changes were also reviewed by the attorney. Some companies will even hire attorneys or other specialists to write the program for them. That's a very good option. If your company is not comfortable writing their own program in-house, well, subcontract to an attorney or other specialists that have more experience in this area. Another thing about your program, once you have it written, once you're implementing it, you need to make sure all of your personnel understand the details of the program, and they will need to sign a consent form indicating their agreement, indicating that they understand that they may be asked to take a drug test or an alcohol test at any time. And I'll look at a sample consent form as we move along here. But let's just look page by page. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but this was the Whitworth Construction Company Alcohol and Drug Program Statement of Substance-Free Workplace Policy. And you start with just a general statement of policy. Then you identify what's considered prohibited conduct that would be in violation of the company policy. I don't have it highlighted here, but you're going to want to have some type of statement like this: drug-free workplace commitment, consequences of policy violation. What can happen if someone tests positive for drugs and alcohol in the workplace. And one of those options would be a suspension pending investigation. And if anybody would like a copy of this, I'd be more than happy to share it with you. This company was bought out by Manhattan Road and Bridge. So, again, this company no longer exists. So I'm more than happy to share it with you as an example program. And if you were in my construction management class last summer, you have a copy of this on that flash drive that I gave you. And a sample program like this, let's say you go to work for a smaller company and they don't have a written program, this could be your template for starting a program. You would go in and change it around some, make some modifications. Then once you think you've got all the modifications made that are needed, then you would send it to your attorney to review. Also, there's a section on what happens if a worker refuses to test. Basically, if somebody refuses to test, that's the same as a positive test result. And I've had a lot of cases, I say a lot, probably 3 or 4 cases where a person refused the drug test because they knew they would be positive, and they pretty much understood, hey, I know I'm going to lose my job, but I can't take the drug test. And that may be better for them to refuse the test than to take the test and have a positive drug test in their file, in their employment history. That positive drug test in their employment history could follow them for several years. So it may be better for them, if they know they're going to be positive, just to refuse the test and go find another job. Applicant pre-hire testing was part of our program. We also had reasonable suspicion testing, which we'll talk more about. Post-accident testing or post-incident testing, whichever term you prefer, was part of the program. We did random drug tests and alcohol tests, and this section explains the random selection process. We talk about the different groups and different people who may be subject to a random drug test, and pretty much anybody in the company could have their name drawn in a random test and have to submit a drug test or alcohol test also. More information about the procedures involved. Mobile testing facilities. I'll talk more about this. This really helped our company out a lot, this mobile drug testing and alcohol testing. And again, just more information about the program. 8 pages is the length of the program. That's going to be adequate for most companies. Then here's an appendix that provides additional information, and here's another appendix. This is the consent form. Every employee had to sign this form. I, so-and-so, authorize Whitworth Construction Company to conduct through its designated physician or laboratory testing facility urine, breath, saliva, hair follicle, and or blood tests to screen for alcohol and drugs, and understand that this is a requirement for employment and or continued employment. I authorize Whitworth Construction to use the results for decisions relating to my employment and or continued employment. I understand screening tests will be performed to detect the presence of alcohol and or drugs. I further understand that the presence of one or more of those substances may cause the termination of my employment. I voluntarily authorize the release of all test results to Whitworth Construction. All tests will be kept in the strictest confidence. I understand the results of the test will be used solely for the purpose of determining whether I am fit for continued employment in the job for which I am presently applying or employed. As an applicant, I fully understand and acknowledge that an offer of employment is entirely conditional upon several factors, including, but not limited to, voluntary submission to substance tests and satisfactory test results. And that's just a boilerplate example of a consent form. Many of you have probably already had to sign a consent form like this. If you haven't, you will at some point in your career, because this is just very standard procedure for most companies in the year 2020. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop this module here. When we come back, we'll continue discussing in more detail substance abuse programs.